Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister now admit that his industrial relations changes failed to meet the basic test of providing secure jobs and decent pay? Is this why he had to gut his own bill in the Senate today?
The Prime Minister has the call.
No, Mr Speaker. No. Mr Speaker, the bill that we continued to see supported, Mr Speaker, including the measures that he's just referred to, were going to be voted against by the Labor Party. They were opposing the whole bill, Mr Speaker. All the bill. They were opposing introducing tougher penalties to deter underpayments of employees. They told us very clearly, Mr Speaker, very clearly that they did not want to support these measures. And now they say they do want to support these measures, Mr Speaker. You know what that sounds like? That sounds like an each-way bet, Mr Speaker. That sounds like another each-way bet from the Labor Party. They want to oppose it, and then they want to support it, then they want to oppose it. Mr Speaker, it's a game of tennis. What's his next position?
The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. Each way is putting up legislation and then moving amendments to gut your own legislation.
Well, that's not a point of order.
That's
the
what
Prime
he
Minister
just
has
did.
the call.
That
The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, that is an abuse of the standing orders. There is no point of order. No point of order at all.
Members on
all
my
that
left.
is a guy that's trying to show up to his union bosses who are in the House.
Members on both sides. The member for McEwen. Member for McEwen. Members on both sides. Leader of the House. Whenever anyone rises on a point of order— no, the Leader of the Opposition, I'm directing this your way. Whenever anyone rises on a point of order, they need to state the point of order. I won't put up with frivolous points of order. I also won't put up with— let me finish. I also won't put up with people complaining about frivolous points of order by making them themselves. I hope that's clear. I think we just let the Prime Minister answer the question. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the government sought to put measures into this parliament that would create more jobs. That's what we sought to do, Mr Speaker. The Labor Party opposed all the measures, including those they now pretend to support. You can't have an each-way bet on this, Mr Speaker. That's what this Leader of the Labor Party is famous for. Mr Speaker, we will pursue measures through the parliament, Mr Speaker, and on a day, Mr Speaker, when Australians learn that there are more jobs now in the Australian economy, Mr Speaker, than they were before the pandemic, we're not going to give up on continuing to create even more jobs, Mr Speaker, even if the Labor Party is not as passionate about creating jobs as the coalition government is, Mr Speaker, even though it was this government that saw 1.5 million jobs created under the policies that we put in place when we came to government. And now those jobs that were lost over the course of the COVID pandemic have now returned. There's more work to do, Mr Speaker, but we will stand up for jobs each and every other day, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Labor Party and the Labor Party have demonstrated they're against job creation by opposing policies that support job creation.
The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Would the Prime Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government's COVID-19 economic recovery plan is strengthening our economy and creating jobs to chart our comeback from the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question, and can I thank her for her courage. Her courage that has been on display in this chamber each and every day, Mr Speaker, and certainly in these most recent days, but none greater than the courage she showed at the last election. And when she went to that election and she faced that torrent, Mr Speaker, she did so for many reasons. And one of the reasons was that she believes in Australians getting into jobs. Like all members on this side, and Mr Speaker, it is our great mission to continue to do everything we can to put Australians into work. And as we came out of that last election, we continued to see the jobs created. And we got to the point where 1.5 million jobs in total have been created since we first came to government. But we wanted to keep going. But then, Mr Speaker, the global pandemic struck. And it struck hard. And it took hundreds of thousands of Australians, 1 million Australians indeed, Mr Speaker, reduced to 0 hours. And this was a great devastation for our country. But, Mr Speaker, we learned today that there are now more Australians in work today, as of the February data, than there were when the pandemic began. Now, Mr Speaker, that is a comeback. That is a great Australian comeback. And we've done it the Australian way, Mr Speaker, and what that means is it has been the tenacity and the endurance of Australians that have stayed in jobs, that have kept jobs open to Australians and have seen themselves through this terrible pandemic and recession. And so today, 88,700 jobs created in February, Mr Speaker,
Prime Minister
that takes us back across that line.
Pause. The members for McEwen and the member for Fisher will leave under 94A and they can continue their conversation outside the chamber. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And of those 88,700 jobs, 74,100 jobs, more than 80% of those jobs coming back for women, Mr Speaker. Women keep getting into jobs, young people keep getting into jobs, Australians keep getting into jobs, Mr Speaker, as a result of the comeback from the COVID-19 recession, because this government stood up for jobs, stood up for Australians, backed into businesses to keep Australians in jobs. Mr Speaker, women's participation has returned to the near pre-COVID record level of 61.4%, Mr Speaker. We are seeing Australians come back from this crisis. We are seeing Australia lead the world in the return from the COVID pandemic and the recession it caused. Mr Speaker, there is more work to do, and there are many parts of this country which still feel the effects, and will for some time yet, of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is why the measures that we put in last year's budget, the tax incentives for Australian businesses to invest, the continued support for key sectors affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, the tax cuts that are supporting individual Australians, Mr Speaker. And I can tell you, in response to what's been said by those opposite, Mr Speaker, tax cuts for people and jobs matters, and there are more people and jobs today than before, Mr Speaker.
Call the Deputy Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to numerous reports today of Australians eligible for COVID vaccinations who are unable to book online, unable to get through to their GP clinic, or are turned away when they do. Gawler Medical Clinic Practice Manager Kate says, "Our hands are tied. Our clinic and others are thinking about pulling out of the program altogether because of the stress it's putting on our staff." Why did the Prime Minister focus on the announcement of his booking system but fail on the delivery?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I'm delighted to inform the House that, in fact, we have now passed 22,500 vaccinations yesterday in one day
Member
alone.
for Franklin.
What we've seen is a 10% increase in vaccinations in that one day. In addition to that, with regards to the launch of Phase 1B, I'm also particularly pleased to be able to say that yesterday there were 381,000 people who visited the vaccine eligibility checkup, that we've had thousands of bookings around the country, and that we are on track for over 1,000 general practices to begin next week. As part of that, there will be approximately 250,000 vaccines made available for the general public, 150,000 for the states, and then 100,000 for a combination of aged care and other frontline emergency service workers. In particular, what's important is that there was a 98% rate of people being able to get through on their first attempt to the vaccine information and location service, and that almost all of those who sought to do so on a second attempt were able to do so. So 381,000 people were able to successfully connect yesterday. Importantly, today we've added over 100 Commonwealth vaccination clinics. These are what are called general practice respiratory clinics. They've been doing the testing for the nation, and as of next week, they will also be doing the vaccination for the nation. Bookings for those open tomorrow. Bookings for general practices are on the basis of the individual practice already occurring or will be occurring in coming days. And so what we've done is, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, laid out the plan, made sure that it's available. We've done this in relation to testing, to PPE, to ventilators, always planning and always preparing. What we've seen so far is a very heartening first-day surge of people who are interested, 381,000, and I think that has been immensely heartening. I want to thank our GPs. They are the heroes of the nation over the last year, along with our nurses and our pathologists, our aged care workers and our health workers. So the simple answer is, not only are we prepared, we already, in terms of the doses to be delivered to those general practices, the advice that I have is by the end of today, 870 plus of those practices will have received doses. Over another 300 tomorrow will have received them. The goal was to ensure that by the end of Saturday, all of them have received them. We may well achieve that tomorrow. So in terms of the rollout of those materials, ahead of schedule, on track, on plan, about saving lives and protecting lives.
The member for Nichols.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is supporting jobs in rural and regional Australia as we recover from COVID-19 pandemic?
Member for Chifley will cease interjecting.
He's a big fan.
I haven't called you yet. Deputy Prime Minister, that's the call.
And talking of fans, we've of course got the fans for our aviation network support program.
That's it.
You want it, don't you? OK. We've got the regional airline network support. We've got RANS. We've got the domestic aviation network support. We've got RANS. And of course, so we've got DANS, we've got RANS, we've got the Tourism Aviation Network support, we've got TANS, and we've got fans, member for Chifley, and so many others who are getting on those cheap airline tickets. And of course, we want to get people to Cairns and other destinations as well. And in the members' electorate, we've got SAM, and that is the Shepparton Art Museum. Oh, I thought you were about to do a point of order on how good our measures are that we're rolling out right across the nation. And of course we've got roadworks, we've got investment in fruit packing sheds, and importantly 16,751 employees, workers are no longer in the member for Nichols electorate relying on JobKeeper. They've graduated from that important program and they're getting on with the job of building a better Victoria. They're getting on with the job of building a better Australia and a better life for themselves, Mr Speaker. They've needed that support, of course. They've had it and they're now moving on. But our $110 billion investment right across the nation is supporting 100,000 jobs, 100,000 workers, and that is so important. And the Move to More campaign that is being put up by the Regional Australia Institute has been doing good work since 2012, and they've got a campaign to get city dwellers out into the regions. The RAI, headed up by Liz Ritchie, has identified 54,000 jobs in regional Australia right now, and they're good jobs, good-paying jobs, not just in agriculture and resources and those sectors that are so important and vibrant to regional Australia, but indeed in law firms, in accountancy practices, in health, hospitality. So many areas of endeavour in regional Australia that are crying out for people to come to those regions and take those jobs and to have a better lifestyle, have a family home where they can live like a king or a queen, have a big backyard, have a swimming pool, have a 3-car lock-up garage. There are opportunities in regional Australia like never before. There are jobs, and importantly, those areas have been largely COVID-free. They've been largely COVID-free because of the great work that regional Australians have shown. They've listened to the best possible medical advice, they've followed the best possible medical advice, and they've kept their communities largely COVID-free. And we're getting on with the job of rolling out that infrastructure package. And I'm proud of the fact that a third of that infrastructure package is going to regional areas, because regional areas are keeping this country great, have always done, will always do.
The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given it has been 72 hours since Brittany Higgins told the Women's March for Justice the Prime Minister's office had sought to undermine her loved ones, I ask for the 4th time, has the Prime Minister asked his staff if this is true? If not, Why not?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, I have nothing further to add to the answer I provided yesterday, and I refer the member to the answer.
Members on my left. The member for Sydney. The member for Clark is waiting patiently. The member for Clark has the call.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, in October last year, the government committed to renewing the Equal Remuneration Order supplement for federally funded community services. Yet homelessness services, which include domestic and family violence crisis accommodation, were excluded and nationally are about to lose over $56 million in funding. This is the equivalent of over 500 frontline workers, the majority of whom are women. Prime Minister, this is obviously an absurd decision, not least because homelessness services are already turning away thousands of people, many of whom are, again, women and children fleeing domestic and family violence. Prime Minister, will the government protect vulnerable women and children and commit to including the homelessness services in the ERO deal?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, and I'll ask the Minister for Homelessness, Housing and other matters to add to my answer. The member will probably be aware that the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement, and this goes back to a time actually when I was Minister for Social Services for many, many years, an initiative that began under the member for Sydney, which established a national partnership agreement on homelessness, Mr. Speaker. This was an agreement that was done on an annual basis. It wasn't permanent funding, it was just 1 year only funding that got rolled over 1 year after 1 year. As Minister, I made that a permanent arrangement. And that meant that the many thousands of organisations across the country that are involved in supporting homelessness in this country have been given funding on an ongoing and a permanent basis. Now, this is principally the responsibility of state governments, but through the National Partnership Agreement, Mr. Speaker, we have continued to provide federal support on a permanent basis. And that includes for many of the areas, including the ones that you've identified in your question. But I'll ask the Minister to add further to my answer, but simply note that the Commonwealth can continue to provide $1.6 billion a year through that agreement to states and territories to support the provision of housing and homelessness services. That support is provided to the states so the states can do their job of supporting people who find themselves in these positions of homelessness. We provide support to that arrangement, but state governments are principally responsible for that, and we encourage them through our significant funding support for them to do that job.
And the Minister for Homelessness.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the member for Clark for his question and for his long-term interest in these matters. In addition to what the Prime Minister has just said, yes, we made the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement more certain for all of the states and territories. What the Prime Minister also included when he renegotiated the agreement was indexation of the agreement. So not only is there more certainty with the funding, it has now been indexed. And indeed, the funding that you're referring to, which represents about 3% of that agreement, resulted from a temporary measure that was put in place as a result of a Fair Work Australia Equal Remuneration Order as a transitional arrangement many years ago. So what the government has done instead, we've provided an additional $132.6 million over 3 years to increase base funding for DSS grant programs impacted by this cessation of those SACS supplement payments. This new ongoing funding...
The Minister will resume his seat. The member for Clark on a point of order.
Yeah, on relevance, please, Speaker. The question goes specifically to the supplement which has been cut to those services.
The Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The funding has not been cut. The funding is part of this agreement. The funding ceases, and what we are doing, we've put in place $132 million. $132 million.
The Minister's time has concluded. I call the member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, and my question is to our Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House how the Morrison government's strong leadership on the economy and its unprecedented levels of economic support is delivering on our commitment to create more and more jobs for Australians? And more importantly, is the Treasurer aware of any threats to further job creation in our economy?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Leichhardt for his question and note that he is a fierce and formidable advocate for the people of North Queensland, Mr Speaker. And I thank him for his continued service to the people of Leichhardt. Mr Speaker, the Australian economy is recovering from the most significant economic shock since the Great Depression. And today we had confirmation of the strength and the resilience of the Australian economy, Mr Speaker, with the unemployment rate falling to 5.8%, with 88,700 new jobs being created, with the participation rate being kept at around a record high and employment levels getting back to their pre-pandemic levels, Mr Speaker. And what was particularly pleasing about today's job numbers was to see that of all those 88,700 new jobs, all of those jobs were full-time jobs, Mr Speaker. And more than 80% of those jobs went to women, Mr Speaker. And more than 40% of those jobs went to young people, Mr Speaker. So this was all about creating more jobs across every sector and every region across the economy. And the reason why the economy is bouncing back so strongly has been the commitment of 25 million plus Australians, with the strong support of the Morrison government, including $251 billion in direct financial support, JobKeeper, JobSeeker, the cash flow boost, the $750 cash payments have all helped the Australian economy to rebound. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked, are there any threats to our economic recovery? And we know that we on this side of the House stand for lower taxes, Mr Speaker, because we want Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn. But those on the other side of the House, they stand for higher taxes,
Member
Mr
for
Speaker.
Rankin.
Higher taxes.
Member for Rankin.
The member for Rankin, well, he stands for higher taxes because he was the co-architect with the member for McMahon of higher taxes on your superannuation, higher taxes on your income, higher taxes on retirees, higher taxes on housing and higher taxes on small business. And just the other week, the Leader of the Opposition was given an opportunity to support the legislated stage 3 tax cuts. And you know what he said? He refused to commit to it. He said, we'll have to wait and see, Mr Speaker. We'll have to wait and see. So if you are a diesel mechanic earning $90,000 a year, you will be $1,100 worse off if the Leader of the Opposition doesn't support the legislated stage 3 tax cuts. The reality is, Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House stand for lower taxes and more jobs, and that's what we've delivered.
Yeah. The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is again to the Prime Minister. On Monday, Brittany Higgins stood out of the front of this parliament and she said, "I watched as the Prime Minister of Australia publicly apologised to me through the media, while privately his media team actively undermined and discredited my loved ones. How can the Prime Minister hear a serious allegation from Brittany Higgins about appalling actions by his own staff and refuse to even check if it is true?"
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I've already addressed this matter, Mr Speaker, and I refer the member to my earlier answers.
The member for Barara has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House of how the Morrison government's strong stewardship of our economy is delivering on our commitment to generate more full-time jobs for all Australians? Is the Treasurer aware of any credible alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I acknowledge the experience of the member for Barara in local government, in higher education, and as a fierce advocate on mental health and Indigenous issues, Mr Speaker, and note that he's a real person of integrity. Now, Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House are witnessing an economic recovery that is occurring twice as fast and 6 months earlier than was initially expected. An economic recovery that is happening twice as fast and 6 months earlier than we initially expected, Mr Speaker. Australia's been able to maintain its AAA credit rating. We've seen business and consumer confidence reach pre-pandemic levels, Mr Speaker. We saw growth in the December quarter of 3.1%, and the first time since records began back in 1959 of 2 consecutive quarters of economic growth of more than 3%, Mr Speaker. And we've seen more than 2.7 million Australians graduate off JobKeeper, including more than 20,000 in the electorate of Berowra. And today, Mr Speaker, we've got another proof point about how the Australian economy is recovering and bouncing back strongly, with the unemployment rate falling to 5.8% and 88,700 new jobs being created. Now, Mr Speaker, 69,000 new full-time jobs were created for women, and of the 360,000 full-time jobs created since May, more than 60% have gone to women. And female full-time employment is now 1.8% higher than pre-pandemic. Now, Mr Speaker, even with these job numbers, the former economic advisor to Julia Gillard, Stephen Koukoulas, couldn't hide his delight, saying, and I quote, "Some pretty good labour force numbers, whichever way you cut it. This recovery has been remarkably good, Mr Speaker. Remarkably good." Now, the member for I'm asked about alternatives, Mr Speaker. The member for Rankin is the most sombre person in this place today, Mr Speaker, because at every opportunity Labor has been talking down the Australian economy, and we know.
To say to the Treasurer,
we know that they want to hit the Australian
Treasurer will
economy
resume his seat
with
for a second.
380.
The Treasurer will resume his seat. Treasurer is not able to go down the path he's going down in this answer because he was asked whether there were any credible alternative policies. So unless he's going to address that, he needs to confine himself. Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, there are certainly no credible alternative policies from that side of the House.
Okay, well,
but
what
we do know is that our record unprecedented commitment of direct financial support, the equivalent of around 13% of GDP, $251 billion, is helping to get Australians back into work, helping Australians get back into work much earlier than was initially expected both by Treasury and the Reserve Bank of Australia. Our job is to create more jobs, and that is what we are doing for Australians.
The member for Sydney has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Have the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and Principal Private Secretary been interviewed by his former Chief of Staff, Mr Gagens, about their knowledge of the reported sexual assault of Brittany Higgins?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for a question. Those inquiries are being made by the Secretary of my department, the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, and those matters are a matter for the Secretary. I don't involve myself in the investigations or inquiries that the Secretary is making independently of me or my office, Mr Speaker. That is something that is matters for him, and in fact, Mr Speaker, if I was involved in that process, that would be highly inappropriate. Highly inappropriate, Mr Speaker. But I note, Mr Speaker, the way that the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet is referred to in this place, as if there is no Secretary of a department, Mr Speaker, who has never worked on any other side of politics. And I would invite the Leader of the Opposition and the members opposite to accord our department secretaries the respect to which they're entitled to.
The member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please update the House on the status of the COVID-19 pandemic globally and how Australia's response is helping to save and protect lives?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Chisholm for her support, particularly for mental health for young people, but throughout the course of the pandemic for the Australian people. And one thing that really strikes all Australians is the extraordinary results here when we look around the world. we see around the world, sadly, 121 million cases. We see in particular that in the last 24 hours, over 480,000 cases. And whilst the world had been making progress for many weeks, there has been an increase in recent days and over the last 2 weeks in terms of global daily cases. That's a matter for deep concern, as we discussed yesterday with regards to Papua New Guinea. At the same time, we've seen almost 2.7 million lives lost, over 9,200 lives lost in one day across the globe to COVID-19. In Australia, by comparison, when we compare, when we contrast, when we look at where we're at, we've had 0 cases of community transmission in the last 24 hours. This is the 46th day this year of 0 cases of community transmission. Thankfully, we are now again at 0 Australians in intensive care. There was one, but that person has thankfully been able to leave ICU. And 0 lives lost in Australia to COVID-19 for the entire 2021 year to date. And that's an extraordinary, an inconceivable, an almost unimaginable result for this country. And we thank all of our doctors and our nurses, we thank everybody involved, all of the Australians. Those twin strategies of containment and capacity have put Australia in this position, which I think we can safely say, when we look at the economic results and the health results, truly do make us the envy of the world. We see closing the borders, as difficult as that was, has helped save lives and protect lives. Testing at over 15 million tests. Tracing, which has been fundamentally important. The work being done with regards specifically to our distancing, and then the build-out of our capacity, including a rollout which has now seen over more than 220,000, growing to over 240,000 vaccines today, which is providing that confidence. Very significantly, one thing happened on the weekend. There were 2 cases, there were 2 states, and no borders closed. 2 cases, 2 states, no borders closed. That confidence in Australia is growing every single day. We've shown we've done it once, we'll continue to do it, and we'll continue to save lives and protect lives.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. 30 days ago, the Prime Minister told this House he asked his former Chief of Staff, one of the few people he's ever shown empathy for, to verify what his office knew about the reported sexual assault of Brittany Higgins only metres from where he works. Mr Gagents reported his findings on the Prime Minister's sports rorts within 2 weeks. Why is this report about the Prime Minister's staff taking so long, and will the Prime Minister release this report when it is received?
Just before I call the Prime Minister, I'm just going to say to the Leader of the Opposition, if it wasn't he as Leader of the Opposition asking the question, I would have simply moved to the next question. Whilst questions have preambles, that character inclusion really is inappropriate, and we're not going to have questions where there's a commentary about the person being asked the question. So I'm going to ask the Leader of the Opposition to rephrase his question.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. 30 days ago, the Prime Minister told this House he asked his former Chief of Staff to verify what his office knew about the reported sexual assault of Brittany Higgins only metres from where he works. Mr Gagents reported his findings on the Prime Minister's sports rorts within 2 weeks. Why is this report about the Prime Minister's staff taking so long, and will the Prime Minister release this report when it is received?
The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Clearly, the first part of that is out of order because it is not within the Prime Minister's responsibility to comment on behalf of the head of his department. The head of his department has, Mr Speaker, a process underway.
The Leader of the House will pause. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Members for Perth, Franklin and others.
Mr Speaker...
No, just pause for a second. As I've said, interjections are disorderly at all times, but when you're expecting the chair to listen to the point of order and rule on the question, I'm kind of inclined to say to those on my left, if you create a wall of noise when I'm trying to rule on it, I'll just go to the next question. I mean, really, it's the most counterproductive thing you could do. The Leader of the House will be heard now in silence, just as the Manager of Opposition Business is the Leader of the House. If you could start again, actually.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Under Standing Order 98, the Prime Minister does not have responsibility for answering a question that is outside of his responsibility, Mr Speaker. The fact is that the Departmental Secretary has a process underway and the question goes to the timing of that reporting. That is not possible for the Prime Minister to answer. It is a question for the Secretary of the Department, perhaps in estimates, but not in question time to the Prime Minister, and that part of the question should be ruled out of order.
The Manager of Opposition Business. Manager of Opposition Business. Member for Sydney, I'm trying to listen to the Manager of Opposition Business. The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
It's hard to know where to start, but to the point of order, the Leader of the House referred...
Just while we're trying to deal with this, the member for Goldstein's sort of lurking, ready to ask a question. It's not going to happen straight away. If you want to stretch your legs, do it outside. Otherwise, take your seat, please. Well, you won't be asking it if you keep doing that. The Manager of Opposition Business.
I'll go directly to the standing order that the Leader of the House referred to. He referred to Standing Order 98, where the limitations on what you can be asked are found in subsection C, where there's a list of 3 things: public affairs, administration and proceedings. Proceedings in the House is the first part of the question because it asks references what the Prime Minister previously told the House. In terms of public affairs, I think it would be hard to argue that the government response to the reported sexual assault of Brittany Higgins has not become part of public affairs. In terms of administration, if there is any part of the administration of government that the Prime Minister should have a level of responsibility for, it is the head of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. We have previously had questions about all parts of the bureaucracy. If the head of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet is out of order, then there's actually not much you're allowed to ask about.
I'll just rule on this now so that we can move on, having heard both the points of order. I appreciate the point the Leader of the House is endeavouring to make, but there is a long history of allowing these questions, even where, I have to say in fairness, they might be difficult or impossible to answer, but they can be asked, but if they're unanswerable at this point, that's something that will become clear in the answer, and certainly the last part of the question, it's the one thing we all agree on, is clearly in order, because that's directly within the Prime Minister's purview. So I'll call the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, as I've indicated to the House before, and I'll indicate again today, this work is being done by the Secretary of my department. It's being done at arm's length from me. I have no involvement in that process, Mr Speaker, and nor should I. That would be inappropriate. The Secretary should conduct his inquiries as he sees fit and without any interference or any involvement from me as Prime Minister. That would be highly inappropriate. Now, he has not provided me with a further update about when I might expect that report, but I have no doubt the opposition will be able to ask questions of him in Senate estimates next week, which is the appropriate place where those matters can be raised with the Secretary of my department. But yet again, Mr Speaker, we see in the rather personal sledging way of the Leader of the Opposition asking this question, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, he wishes to get into this. He wishes to get into this, whether it's on myself, Mr Speaker, or indeed trying to undermine the credibility of the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. He's undertaken personal attacks on these, which is his form, Mr Speaker. It is his form, Mr Speaker, because, Mr Speaker, on our side of the House, we will take a different approach. We will appoint people as secretaries of departments, Mr Speaker, because of their credibility for those jobs. So whether it's Secretary Pizzullo, Mr Speaker, or former Secretary Moratis, Mr Speaker, who once sat opposite each other at a desk in opposition in Kim Beazley's office, fined public servants, fined secretaries, Mr Speaker. Secretary Kennedy, Mr Speaker, who worked indeed for the last Labor government, Mr Speaker, a fine public servant doing a fine job, Mr Speaker. Now, we will put people in those jobs, Mr Speaker, because they have the credibility and the experience and the professional expertise to do those jobs. In this last 12 months, Mr Speaker, our public servants have done an extraordinary job in supporting our government, whether it's been through the Border Force and the work done by Secretary Pizzullo, Mr Speaker, or Secretary Kennedy, and the amazing job Treasury has done to support the Treasurer and I in putting in place JobKeeper, or indeed Secretary Gaetjens, Mr Speaker, who has led our public service through one of the most impressive times of their performance in the Commonwealth's history. And if the Leader of the Opposition wants to get himself into a character assessment, Mr Speaker, and a character contest—
The Prime Minister resume his seat. Members on my right. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker, on relevance. This question goes to his job and the job that
just asked
his
the Leader of the
office is
Opposition
doing.
to resume his seat. There's a number of elements to the question, but I've allowed the Prime Minister to go down the track he's gone for very good reason, because the question did have an inference in it, which itself could have been ruled out of order on a strict reading of the standing orders, about the Secretary of his department. It did. When it asked why the sports rights inquiry took 2 weeks and why this is taking so long, if he's doing the inquiry, well, that is an inference, and I'm allowing the— Yeah, well, and he's responding to it. I mean, I didn't write the question. He's responding to it. The Prime Minister has the call.
The Leader of the Opposition wants to get into a character assessment contest with the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Mr Speaker. He won't come up very well on that one, Mr Speaker. And he's saying he wants to be in a character assessment test with me, Mr Speaker. I'm happy to accept that challenge, Mr Speaker. I'm happy to have my character as an individual in this place, Mr Speaker, and in my personal conduct matched against this Leader of the Opposition any day of the week.
And members on my left, member for McMahon, the member for Goldstein now has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government is working to combat foreign interference and espionage, and what is being done to protect our nation and our sovereignty as a nation?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. Really recognise the work that he does in protecting our country through his membership of the committee, Mr Speaker, on intelligence and security, and I recognise the work of members on both sides of the aisle who, on the Intelligence Committee, really do a great job. Mr Speaker, there is nothing more important to our country than our sovereignty and protecting our values and standing up for our beliefs. And, Mr Speaker, when you look over the last 24 hours at what the Australian Federal Police and the Victorian Police have been able to do in disrupting what was potentially a catastrophic event, that is a great credit to them. And it's not the first time, Mr Speaker, in recent history where the AFP have been able to disrupt an alleged terrorist plot. We are still under threat. We've, of course, gone through a very unusual period. We're still in it in relation to the virus. But that doesn't mean that terrorists have gone away. It doesn't mean that the threat is not present. It doesn't mean that because people aren't travelling overseas or people aren't coming here that there is not a threat in our country. And, Mr Speaker, people are being radicalised online. People are spending more time online, in particular young individuals, impressionable young minds, and we are very concerned, Mr Speaker, about that threat. So when ASIO steps up and protects our country and our sovereignty and our values in relation to these matters of terrorism, we give them a great deal of credit. But there's another side of ASIO's work, and that is to make sure that they can counter the foreign interference that is present in this country, has been for decades, will be, Mr Speaker, whilst ever there are people that want to gather intelligence, understand what we're doing in relation to protecting and defending our country, national security secrets, all of that which goes into protecting our assets both here and internationally, our people, the efforts of the Defence Force, etc. And so the Director-General, Mr Speaker, in a speech last night, has obviously provided some detail to the public about concerns that he's had for a long period of time and action that has been taken. And I'm proud to say that we have invested more money into ASIO over the course of the last 12 months and indeed over the period of this government than any time in its 7-decade history. ASIO has a 70-year history in this country. We should all be incredibly proud of the work that they do, much of which is not publicly disclosed. But of course, over the course of the last day, we have been able to recognise the work of those members of the Counter Foreign Interference Task Force. The task force has already investigated over more than 30 cases, and the approaches and the actions that are alleged in relation to some of these individuals that have been identified by that task force remain incredibly concerning. The threat is still ever present, Mr Speaker, and this government will do whatever it takes to keep Australians safe.
The member for Perth. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister confirmed he had sought the advice of the Solicitor General about the Attorney-General's portfolio responsibilities. Why is it that the Prime Minister doesn't ask the Solicitor General about an independent investigation into the allegations of serious sexual assault, but does ask the Solicitor General about how the Attorney-General can keep his job?
The Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. There are two separate matters. The second matter relates to the conduct of business by the Attorney-General when he returns to his duties at the end of this month, and given the fact that he's bringing forward a defamation action, indeed against the ABC, Mr Speaker, which is also a government agency, that it is important to understand where possible conflicts may arise, and so we've sought legal advice to that end, Mr Speaker. On the other matter, Mr Speaker, it is not in contemplation for the government to enter into such an extrajudicial inquiry, and nor have I received advice from my department that is something I would need to seek advice from the Solicitor General on in relation to that matter. They are two separate issues, Mr Speaker. We believe in the rule of law in this country, and that's how we're dealing with that matter, Mr Speaker. And I've already, during the course of this week, indicated that if that had been our practice, Mr Speaker, that wouldn't be the first extrajudicial inquiry we would have got involved in. We would have done one on a Labor member, Mr Speaker, long before this. But we didn't think that was the right response on that occasion either, Mr Speaker.
The member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister please update the House on the Morrison government's commitment to empowering women in the workforce and boosting female workforce participation?
The Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's a pleasure to take a question from the member for Reid, the first woman to represent the seat and one who owned and ran her own small business for 13 years before coming into this place. Mr Speaker, we're coming back from the COVID recession and women are well and truly playing their part. The Morrison government recognises that increasing women's workforce participation is important for the economy as a whole. Of course it is, but it's also vital for women's individual economic security, the choices that they're able to make for themselves and their families. And we're committed to backing women like Edwina Gilbert in the member for Reid's electorate. She runs Phil Gilbert Motor Group with 180 employees. And we're supporting Edwina in a variety of ways. The Gilbert Group graduated from JobKeeper in September and they're now hiring 12 new apprentices through our JobMaker plan. We're supporting women like Edwina and so many others through all of the measures in our 2020 Women's Economic Security Statement. Coming as it did during COVID, this $240 million package over 5 years provides targeted support to women to strengthen their employment choices, close the gender gap, identify women as leaders and, of course, keep our economy strong. Mr Speaker, so many women were so worried during COVID. They lost their jobs. They were concerned for their family's future. They worried about their children. They worried about their elderly parents. But today's ABS figures show that our comeback plan is working. Out of the 89,000 new full-time jobs, 69,000 of those went to women, meaning we're now having record high women's employment. These aren't just numbers and statistics, they're new jobs, and they're showing that our economic recovery is underway. The Morrison government is committed to improving these jobs figures through measures such as Job Trainer, which supports upskilling and career changes. Mr Speaker, we want to see women come out stronger with new ideas, which we know they always have, with new job opportunities and new training, such as the CEO of the Canberra Institute described Job Trainer as a fantastic opportunity for women and said that 60% of our enrolments are already being taken up by women. There is always more work to do, Mr Speaker, and certainly we must include that we ensure women are well remunerated and well respected in safe and supported workplaces. As women come out of this challenging period of COVID, they can have the confidence that the Morrison government continues to back them and the choices they make. JobMaker, Job Trainer, our childcare package, our Women's Economic Security Statement and so many other initiatives are charting the way forward.
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has said that the Attorney-General would not perform certain functions of his office. If the Prime Minister intends to allow the Attorney-General to resume his duties without an independent inquiry into sexual assault allegations, will the Attorney-General retain responsibility for defamation law reform?
The Prime Minister has the call.
As I said in the House yesterday, and I'll repeat again today, we've sought advice from the Solicitor-General involving these matters, and I'll await the advice from the Solicitor-General, and that will inform our decision about how we would be able to address the issues that the member has just raised.
The member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is leveraging our nation's world-leading resources sector to create manufacturing jobs across Australia?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And she understands just how important the resources sector is for our economy and, of course, for our jobs. And whilst today's job figures are absolutely amazing, with employment hitting 13 million, even higher than before the pandemic, our government is certainly not resting on its laurels. We know that there is more work that needs to be done, and we are out there doing it. So while our resources sector is already a global powerhouse and job creator, we know that there's plenty of potential for us to further capitalise on our natural advantage, to value add, and that's exactly what we are planning to do and what we are already implementing. We are already very good as a nation at developing and implementing resources technology. What we need to do is commercialise so many of the good ideas that already exist out there so that we can take new resources technology through to commercialisation and to markets. Now, likewise, the same thing is in fact at play for our critical minerals. We do have one of the world's largest reserves of these minerals, and they are used every day for items such as batteries, smartphones, pacemakers, digital cameras. But for too long, Mr Speaker, we as a nation have been so good at digging our resources out of the ground, but quite frankly we've been good at putting them on a ship, sending them overseas and then spending an extraordinary amount of money to purchase those resources back in a different form. That has been happening for more than 30 years. It is a long-standing issue in this nation. But what this government is doing is changing that narrative, making sure that what we are doing is value-adding to our resources, and we are particularly doing that in critical minerals processing. So it was, in fact, only just the other week that the Prime Minister and I were in Tomago visiting the site that Energy Renaissance is going to develop. It is about a $28 million project, and what it will be is the first advanced manufacturing facility producing Australian-designed battery storage systems. Now, whilst this is the first, clearly it is not going to be the last, because the manufacturing strategy that we announced in October last year has defined 6 national manufacturing priorities. We need to target these sectors so that we can grow manufacturing in this country and produce the jobs that are so needed.
The member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Lisa is a travel agent in my electorate who fulfilled her dream of owning her own business in 2019. She says she will have to let her 5 staff go when JobKeeper ends, and she's excluded from the airfare subsidy scheme. Why is the Prime Minister ripping away JobKeeper while it's still needed by hardworking small business owners like Lisa?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'll ask the Minister for Tourism to respond further to my answer. Our response to the travel agent sector has been to the order of over $250 million in additional support over and above what has been provided through JobKeeper, which goes till the end of this month, Mr Speaker. And in addition to that, one of the key things we've been working with the tourism and travel sector is to be ensure that the discounted flights that have been made available by the new travel package is that will be combined with other product packages and be packaged up together so it can actually be distributed and sold through the travel agent network. Mr Speaker, when tourists are travelling and we can get them to travel agents, then travel agents of course benefit. But in addition to that, there is a significant further round of support being provided to the travel agents, and I'll ask the Minister to add further to the answer.
The Minister has the call.
What would you know?
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister. And I absolutely agree with what the Prime Minister has said. We are in stage one. Stage one provided $130 million worth of assistance for the travel agents.
Member for Macquarie. Macquarie will cease interjecting.
We announced a further $130 million to support travel agents right across this country. And I'm happy to inform the House that tomorrow Austrade will be engaging with the travel agent sector on the final designs of that additional $130 million package. We want to make sure that we're providing the support that the travel agents need in this country. And so far, announced support is more than $260 million for the travel agents. And can I thank the travel agent sector for the good faith and the way that they have liaised and negotiated with the government. And I look forward to Austrade's meeting with the travel agents tomorrow as we look at the final design of this package, because we want to make sure that we can carry as many travel agents through this pandemic as we possibly can. And as the Prime Minister has said also, one of the key designs of our discounted flights is that we want to encourage Australians to book them through their travel agents. And there's 46,000 discounted flights that are going to be available every single week. And I say to all Australians, do your patriotic duty and get out there and book your discounted flights through your travel agents. That way you can help support them and you'll help support the travel industry across the board. And the money you save on your discounted flights, make sure you spend that in the pubs and the clubs and the restaurants.
Concluded.
Right,
the member for Cowper has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And my question is also to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the Minister please outline how the Morrison-McCormack government is backing innovative businesses in regional Australia to commercialise new products so our regional businesses can compete in world markets and create more local jobs?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Technology, innovation, science and research are really the keys to driving business growth. And on this side of the House, we are firm believers in technology, not taxes, as the way to create the jobs that we need now and the jobs that we will need in the future. But the key step in that is making sure that we are able to translate the good ideas, to commercialise them, take them through to market. Now, creating innovative quality products or new ways of dealing with challenges that businesses face will continue to position Australian industry at the cutting edge. So it will grow jobs and it's going to drive our economy forward. Now, we devised the projects stream of the cooperative research centres to help more businesses to collaborate with industry and researchers so that they can turn those good ideas into a job-creating reality. Now, CRCPs are shorter in duration than the traditional CRCs programs. They're more lean, they're more agile, they're more able to focus on the specific needs of our industries. Now, last year, in the member for Cowper's electorate, Cassegrain Wines received $950,000 for their research project into mitigating smoke taint in grapes affected by bushfires. Now, this is a very practical way that we can help future-proof our wine industry. And in the last CRCP round that opened last month, the Minister for Decentralisation and I announced that there will be a particular focus on projects located in regional Australia. Now, we're developing and delivering on our commitment to back our regions, and these grants are the first in a suite of decentralisation measures that are going to create more jobs and investments in country communities, and that is so important. We wanted to support ingenuity and innovation in our regions, greater collaboration with industry leading to the commercialisation of research. That is what this government is about, because we believe that that is central to making sure that we can drive our economy forward and we can create the jobs that we need here in this country. Now, regional CRCPs have to be located in regional Australia with at least one industry partner relocating from a capital city for the duration of the project. Now, we know that there is considerable wealth of talent in our communities, and we want to make sure that we are in a position to be able to focus on that. And right across our government, we're ensuring that all businesses are supported to grow and to create jobs, whether they're in Brisbane or Ballarat, Melbourne or Mullumbimby, Perth or Port Macquarie, Sydney
The Minister's
or Stanford.
time has concluded. The member for Fenner.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How much of the taxpayer money used to fund JobKeeper has been spent on executive bonuses?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, what has the member for Fenner got against profitable companies, Mr Speaker? The reality is, and what has he got against JobKeeper? Now, decisions by businesses—
Members on my left.
Decisions by businesses about remuneration are matters for them. But this side of the parliament supported the JobKeeper payment because it was an economic lifeline.
Members
to
on my
Australians.
left.
And those on the opposite purported to support the JobKeeper payment. And we know that from the RBA it helped support and save more than 700,000 jobs. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that JobKeeper has been an economic lifeline. We know it's coming to an end, and we know that those opposite always want to take an each-way bet.
The member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. Will the Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government, through its investment in our defence industry, including through Australia's F-35 program, is creating jobs and driving our economic recovery from the COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Lindsay for her question, acknowledging her great passion and interest in defence industry, and particularly want to congratulate her on her own local advanced manufacturing initiative in Taskforce. Great local initiative. Mr Speaker, the Morrison government is investing an historic $270 billion in our defence capability, creating new jobs and new opportunities right across the country, but particularly in regional Australia. And, Mr Speaker, in the Hunter region, we see that this is the real heart of our national endeavour as we start to build a strong sovereign defence industry. And a good example of that is the F-35 Joint Strike Fighters from our region, which will now be sustained in Williamtown. And it was indeed a great pleasure to recently visit Williamtown with the Prime Minister at the BAE's facility, where they were able to launch their Asia-Pacific Regional Sustainment Hub. And I don't know about the Prime Minister, but for me the great thrill there that day was to meet some of the ex-Jetstar workers who had lost their jobs through no fault of their own, and what a great thrill it was for them that they were able to secure work with BAE and were able to stay in the region that they love, where their family and they had grown up in. And I've now heard today that there's now 25 ex-Jetstar workers who are now secured work with BAE. So well done to BAE and well done to those individuals who wanted to stay in that region with their families. Mr Speaker, it's because of our investments in the F-35 program that we are creating more jobs, and we're backing Aussie SMEs in the Hunter region, like Varley. And Varley are providing the landing gear for the F-35 program, but they're also manufacturing the aircraft maintenance sling and also deployable support cabins in the F-35 program. And Varley support a number of hundreds of jobs, I should say, in the Hunter region. And Lockheed Martin Australia, who are the prime for the F-35 program, they're supporting some 165 jobs in that local area. The F-35 program alone is supporting some $2.7 billion contracts with over 50 Australian companies, so I think we can see how significant the F-35 program is to securing job opportunities, especially in the regions. And, Mr Speaker, I'd like to recognise my colleague Senator Holly Hughes from the other place, who has done an outstanding job in championing the defence industry in the Hunter region. And recently, both Senator Hughes and I announced a government contract with Armour Composite Engineering, a contract worth $3.2 million to ACE. And this will see them develop curved body armour and will give them opportunities more to export their product. Mr Speaker, we are getting on with the job of the defence of our nation, and we're providing more opportunities for regional Australians and regional businesses for our defence industry.
The member for Rankin has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that if he'd not given JobKeeper funds to businesses that didn't need it, he'd be able to continue supporting hundreds of thousands of workers who still need help? Why does his government subsidise the strong but sacrifice the weak?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, much to the chagrin of the Deputy Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker, I can confirm that 88,700 new jobs were created in February, Mr Speaker. I can confirm today, Mr Speaker, that as a result of the policies that this government put in place that gave a lifeline to Australians in their greatest hour of need, Mr Speaker, over the course of this year, the million people, Mr Speaker, who lost their job, they're getting their jobs back under the policies of this government, Mr Speaker. I know on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, we know how to put policies in place that get people back into work, because 1.5 million people came back into work during the course of our government prior to the pandemic, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, when 1 million people were forced out of work because of the pandemic, this government showed up. We didn't take an each-way bet on the measures, Mr Speaker. Our government was all in for jobs, Mr Speaker, and we remain all in for jobs for the Australian people, Mr Speaker, while the Labor Party continues day after day, Mr Speaker, to undermine and whittle and gnaw away at the edges of every single positive measure that this government seeks to put in place to support the Australian people. It's a year ago today, Mr Speaker, it's a year ago today that the Biosecurity Act measures were put in place by the Governor-General in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. And a year later, There are more jobs today in the Australian economy than there were, Mr Speaker, when we went into this pandemic. Now, that is a ringing endorsement of the Coalition's economic policies, of the Coalition's precise and timely action that has seen this Australian economy through its worst period since the Great Depression. We got no support from those opposite, Mr Speaker. All we got from those opposite was an each-way bet, Mr Speaker.
Members
on
on
one
my
hand
left.
they supported, on the other hand they undermined, Mr Speaker, all over the shop. We couldn't rely on Labor's support, Mr Speaker. The public can't rely on Labor's support, Mr Speaker. The government has been delivering and held the back of Australians all through this crisis. Thank goodness they didn't have to rely on Labor, because they are completely unreliable.
The member for O'Connor, I say to the member for Kennedy, the call needs to alternate. So I know he missed the member for Rankin. Was on his feet before him the last question. Now the call needs to go to my right. The member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is empowering Indigenous women across the nation?
The Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for O'Connor for your continued support and interest in the issues that impact on our people. I want to start with a comment from a survey of 4,000 Aboriginal families in Western Australia that was undertaken by the Telethon Institute. The point they made that was the most salient was that a young girl who did not finish Year 10 would live a life with all the detriments, would experience violence, would experience disempowerment. Education is important, and that's an important factor that we've been building into the work that we're doing as a government. Target 13 of the Closing the Gap strategy, and it's Closing the Gap Day today, targets activity around women and children to create safe environments. But more importantly, we've got to go back to those Year 10 girls that have left school and look at the ways of empowerment. So $99.6 million to support education, leadership, health and wellbeing outcomes for girls and young women, because that builds the capacity. $72.4 million for the academy and mentoring projects to improve Year 12 attainment and students into post-school pathways. $25 million for Indigenous Girls Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics Academy. These all culminate together to make a difference. As the member for Barton would know, in our movements or our communities, our women are our strength. But if they are disempowered and cannot participate, then they are disadvantaged. Professor Colin Burke did a study that showed that when mothers were engaged in education, their children took the same pathway, that the empowerment for their children came because of the modelling. And that's the work that we need to continue to focus on. A further $75 million for family violence prevention legal services to allow our women to find the supportive measures that protect them and their children. A further $13.8 million invested in Indigenous women's programs, legal services and supplementary legal assistance, because again, it is important that we focus on family. But the other one that's important is the work that Commissioner June Oscar has done. 2,003 women were involved in providing, through roundtables, their voices to identify areas that government must listen to allow women to be empowered to break the circuits that are detrimental to the community, to their family and their children. And so we will work, as the other side has done, to strengthen our women, give them a voice and let them be active participants. Thank you.
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Just before members, the Leader of the Opposition, just on indulgence, and I've got a statement I want to just make to the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Can I associate Labor with the comments of the Minister on behalf of the Shadow Minister and inform him that today Marion Scrimgeour has been selected as Labor's candidate for Lingari. She's someone with an extraordinarily proud history of representing Indigenous women in the NT Parliament. I look forward to her joining this parliament to do the same.